Hey, welcome to the next episode of the UWF ACM Snappy software series. This is a series to show you how to do different things in computer science. In the last episode, we talked about how to make a mobile app. In this episode, we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to show you how to make a single-page web application using Node.js and React. So first off, what is Node.js? Node.js is a runtime environment that lets JavaScript run on a server. So to get started, the first thing we're going to need to do is download and install Node.js. I'm not going to show you the process in this video because I've already installed it on my machine, but it's pretty straightforward overall. The next thing we want to do is install Visual Studio Code. This is the editor that we're going to use to work on our app. Again, I'm not going to show how to install it in this video, but it's pretty straightforward, just like Node.js. You just click on this download button and then follow the steps. So now that we have those two things installed, we can start work on our React app. We're going to be making a to-do list. We're going to be building a web page that lets you add things to a to-do list, check them off by clicking on them, or click on them again to add them back to the list. So what is React exactly? React is a JavaScript library for making single-page web applications. It's made up of various chunks of code called components. Components are essentially building blocks of your web page that you can separate from each other to keep your code nice and tidy. So to get started with our app, the first thing you need to do is open up Visual Studio Code. Once you open it up, it's going to look something like this. You're going to be greeted by this welcome page. You can just close this out. Now go ahead and make a folder to store the code for your app. I've already done that on my end. We're just going to drag and drop this inside of VS Code. As you can see, the left sidebar of VS Code displays what's inside the folder you just dragged and dropped. You could ignore these two things right here. These are just things that I was working on earlier. To get started with our app, we need to run a command to create a new React application. If you don't have this terminal open, you can just click on this new terminal button up here. That should open it up if it's not open already. So to create our React app, we're going to run npx create-react-app, and we'll give our app a certain name. So we'll call ours to-do list. It may take a minute to create the app, but no worries, just be patient and it'll be ready to go in just a minute. Alright, so now that we've built our base application, we can go ahead and start running it. So first thing we need to do is change the directory to the folder that the app is installed in. So in this case, it's to-do list. Now to start running the app, we just do npm start. As you can see, it opens up a new browser tab and it runs this basic app for us. Nothing too spectacular, but this gives us the framework we need to start building our to-do list. So what we're going to do is, first we're going to remove all of this stuff that we see. So the first thing we're going to do is open up our source folder. Our source folder has a lot of our main files inside of it, along with the public folder, which has our index file. Now inside of our index file, we have this div called root. And this is where everything that we're going to build will attach to. This root div is going to hold our entire app inside of it. Let's close out of that for right now though. Let's go over to app.js. So this is what we're currently seeing on that screen. This app function is returning a bunch of HTML code. So since we don't need this anymore, we're just going to remove it for now. And inside of it, since we need to return some kind of code, we can just put a header. And in that header, we can say, welcome to your to-do list. We'll save it, and every time we save using React, it automatically restarts the server for us and updates it to fit our changes. As you can see, the web page now reflects the changes we just made. So let's get back into it. So how React works, as I was saying earlier, is it's made up of different components. A component is basically a chunk of code. Normally, a React project would be made up of many different components, but since this project is so simple, we're just going to have a single component. we're going to call that component to-do list. Now before we can make our component, we need to import React. So import React from React. And we can delete this logo thing because we don't need it anymore. So to make our component, we're going to call it class to-do list, and it's going to extend react.component. Every time we make a component, we have to extend it from react.component. The first thing we're going to do in this class is we're going to make our constructor. In our constructor, we're going to pass in a variable called props. Now props is what React uses to pass data in between components. Again, since this is a more basic project, we're not going to really showcase props, but do be aware that when you're dealing with multiple components, you use props to pass the data between them. First thing we're going to do in this constructor is call super props, because that's what you have to do every time you define your constructor. You have to call the main React.component constructor, the superclass. Now we're going to define our state. So what is a state? A state is basically an object inside of a component that has different values that can change over time. States are how components remember things in React. So in our case, we're going to be making a list, and this list is going to change over time as we add things to it. So in our state, we're going to define it as an object, and this object is going to have two variables. List, which is an array, and then new item text. This will hold the text of whatever item we're adding to our list. We can just put in an empty string as the default value. Now there are 4 functions we're going to make in this class that are going to use the state. Whenever we want to make a function that uses the state, we have to bind it to the state. So the 4 functions we're going to make are handle change, on submit, on item click, and render list item. So we're going to bind each of those functions. This.handle change equals this.handle change .bind this. We're going to do this for the other functions we're going to make. We can just copy this, change this to on submit. Change this to on item click. Change this to render list item. So the first function we're going to make is handle change. We're going to have an input text box on our app that will let you add things to your to-do list. As soon as you type in something to that box, the app is going to detect that and update the current new item text. This function is going to do that. So we'll make handle change, and then we pass in our change event, which is going to be us typing in things into our input box. Whenever we want to update our state, we call this.setState. How we use setState is we pass in a key value pair. So we pass in the name of the state variable that we want to change, along with the value that we want to update it to. The name of our input box is going to be new item text. So we're going to pass in that value into this.setState as the key. So we do event.target.name. This will get the name of the input box from the HTML code. Then we do colon, and then we do event.target.value. We'll be using this function later on. The next function we're going to work on is onSubmit. As soon as the user hits the submit button to add what they typed into their to-do list, we're going to take the value that we just set up here in handle change and push it to our list in the state. So we're going to do onSubmit, pass in the event. We want to prevent the page from reloading when we hit the submit button, because that's what a form does by default. So we want to stop that from happening. So we do event.prevent default, and then event.stop propagation. Next, we're going to make a new list that we can push our submission to. So first, we're going to copy everything that we already have in our list so we don't lose it. So new list equals this.state.list. Now that we have that list, we're going to push our new value to the list. So new list.push. Text is going to be this.state.new item text. And then it's also going to have a done variable, which we set to false by default. If the variable is true, then we're going to display that list item as being crossed out, but we're going to get to that later. Now that we have our new list, we're going to actually set that to the state. So this.setState list equals our new list that we just made, and then set new item text back to its default value. So that's our onSubmit function right there. Next, we're going to make our onItemClick function. This is going to contain the logic for crossing out our list item when we click on it. So we're going to type in onItemClick, pass in the click event. Again, we're going to make a new list, create it from our current list so we don't lose anything. Then we're going to take the done variable of the current item in the list and set it to the opposite of itself. So new list event.target.id.done equals not this. So we're flip-flopping the value right there. This will let it switch between done and not done when we click on it. Now we pass in the updated list to our state. List is new list. Now we're going to make our render list item function. This function is going to be called for every single item in our list. It's going to generate the HTML code for our list item. So render list item, and we're going to pass in the value and the index. So when we're rendering our list item, we want to check and see if the item is done or not. If it's done, then we're going to give it the class name called done, which we'll be defining in our CSS file later on, so that we can display it as being crossed out. Else, we're just not going to give it a class name. So let class name equals value.done. Is it done? If so, make the class name done. Else, just give it an empty string as the class name. So don't give it a class name otherwise. And now we're going to return HTML text from this function. So return parentheses, and now we're going to make the actual HTML list item for the list item that we're currently trying to render. So here we just type in our HTML code, start out with li, have the ID be the index variable that we passed in. We set onClick to be our this.onItemClick function that we made a minute ago. We set class name to whatever value we set class name to, whether it be done or empty. And then we display the value's text. So value.text. All right, we're almost done. So now that we've made our 4 helper functions, we're going to make our render function. A render function is the function in a component that displays its main HTML code. It's called whenever the component's state changes. So that's very useful for having dynamic content on your React app. So we're going to make a render function. And then inside of this render function, we're going to return HTML code. First things first, we're going to have a div. And this div is going to contain our list. It's going to be an unordered list. We're going to give it the class name styles.list. Not style sheet, styles .list, which we'll be declaring later on. And then inside of this list, we're going to call our render list item function that we made for every single item in the list. So JavaScript has a function called map, which lets us use a function on multiple different items inside of an array. It's very useful, and we're going to use it right now. So we call this .state.list.map this .render list item. And this map function is automatically going to pass in the value and the index into render list item. So we don't have to pass it in down here. Map is automatically going to do that for us. Now that we have our list, we're going to make our form. So I'm going to start out by making a HTML form. When we submit the form, so on submit, we're going to call our onSubmit function that we made. This.onSubmit. We're going to have two input variables inside of this form. We're going to have our text box, and then we're going to have our submit button. So we're going to start out by making the text box, call it input. Its type is text. It is required to submit the form. Its name is going to be new item text. Its value is going to be this.state.newItemText. And then when this input changes, so whenever the user types something into the box, we're going to call our handle change function. Then we're just going to make a simple submit input. So input type equals submit. Value, so the text we want to display is submit with a capital S. Boom. All right, so we're almost done. Now we just need to change our CSS so that any item that's done will have a line through it. So we're going to open up index.css. We can delete all this stuff here. This is just the default values that it had. First, we're going to give body some nice looking fonts. Font 20 pix, Century, Gothic, Futura, Sans Serif. Margin is 20 pixels. Our list class is going to have a font size of 200 pixels. And then, so to make any items that are done show a line through them, all we need to do is set text decoration for the done class to line through. All right, so we have all of our code together. Only thing left to do is to attach our to-do list component into our app so that it actually displays it on the page. So to do that, we insert it much like any other HTML element. To-do list. When you insert a component, though, you have to put it inside of a div. It's very important. Otherwise, it will yell at you, like it's doing right now. There. Just tidy up that white space. One last thing I forgot to do is import the styles. Basically, what we're going to do is we're just going to call our CSS file styles. So import styles from our CSS file. And that will let us use our CSS files as a variable like we were doing. It's compiled successfully, so let's go take a look at it. All right, so it says welcome to your to-do list, and we have our text field and our submission field. So let's say that I want to go to the grocery store. Hit submit. It's now added onto our list, and once we click on it, let's say that we finish our grocery store run, we click on it, boom, it's done. But then if we want to bring it back to the list, we can just click on it again. That swaps the done value on it, and the line disappears. So we can add other things to it, like take car to shop, or do taxes. We can mark off any of these things on our list and then bring them back as many times as we'd like. Alright, so this should give you a good idea of how to get started with React and Node.js. React is very good for handling dynamic content such as this to-do list. So that about wraps up this episode of Snappy Software. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below, or hit us up in the UWF CS Discord server. We've got our ACM chat in there, so you can ask us any questions that you might have. Thank you for watching, and you take care.